welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You can see that we are pretty strict with time, but we have to, since we have a packed program and a long day. But it's now time to further push our discussions to talk about maybe some of the solutions to several of the challenges that we have been talking about since this morning. And this particular session will look at how international cooperation can help address some of the threats that we have been discussing. So to take us through this particular discussion, please welcome Tanit Kaur, who's a member of the Transatlantic Commission on Election Integrity. She's also a columnist and investor of New European. Next to her is Therese Pierce-Lanela. She's head of the Program for Electoral Processes at International IDEA, and that's an intergovernmental organization that supports sustainable democracy. Next to her is Srdjan Darmanovic. He's president of the Council of for Democratic Elections of the Venice Commission of the Council of Europe. Welcome to all three of you. To lead us through that particular discussion, it's a pleasure to have with us Julien Mounier, who's director for the Rule of Law, Fundamental Rights and Democracy at the Director General, Justice and Consumers. So welcome, and Julien, over to you.
Good afternoon to all. It's a pleasure for me to be here today, and I must say as a start, really congratulations to the colleagues, because I'm used to the Centre Albert Borchert, and for those who are familiar with it, this building is really a massive upgrade, to put it mildly. So I'm very happy to see you in this fourth session that we have today on strengthening electoral resilience, international cooperation to address common threats. So, of course, I mean, may come obvious to you, but modern open societies may be vulnerable to challenges to elections and the democratic process. I mean, for those of you reading The Guardian, for example, there was quite an instructive article yesterday about Russian interference. So it's quite clear that the manipulative behaviors do not stop at borders, and this, of course, in particular in light of the digital revolution. So international cooperation with organizations promoting democracy and fair election is important to support the free and fair electoral process. And this international cooperation helps tackling the threat by working to prevent the emergence of new threats and limiting the impact of those which have already emerged. So the aim of this panel is to showcase concrete examples of how international cooperation can support free and fair election and help address these common threats. So let me start with Mr. Darmanovic, who has just been introduced. And so I'll go straight to the question. Could you share your experience on international cooperation as a tool to support free and fair elections? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Being a member of the Venice Commission, I will try to explain a little bit more about how we are doing our part in making elections more free, more fair, and especially electoral legislation throughout Europe, but not only Europe, but elsewhere. We live in a very interesting time. Very few regimes in the world openly negate democracy or say for themselves that they are not democracies. Incumbent autocrats, or would-be autocrats, undermine democracy mostly by targeting its key institution, elections, of course. Action directed against elections seek to undermine public trust in the integrity of the electoral process. It is in order to trigger a cynical approach to elections. The authoritarian narrative, very often packed in underlying and hidden messages, go along these lines. Elections anyway don't decide on anything. They are rigged and stolen in your democracies as well. So why do you think you are better than us? Unlike of your inefficient democracies, we at least can deliver. Actions and threats against elections happen in the offline and more frequently in the online world. Previous work of Council of Europe and Venice Commission has identified various types of threat to the electoral integrity and the right to free and fair elections. Let me mention some of them. Unregulated use of digital technologies in election processes, cybersecurity attacks against electoral infrastructure, disinformation, hate speech manifestations in electoral process, foreign funding for political parties, illegal foreign funding, of course, foreign interference in elections. As you know, the full name of the Venice Commission is International Commission for Democracy Through Law. In 1990, when two great Italians, back then Foreign Minister of Italy Gianni De Michelis and famous Italian lawyer Professor Giovanni La Pergola, enthusiastically launched the idea of this Council of Europe expert body to assist countries to establish, entrench, and develop democratic institutions. Commission's full name was above all associated with human progress, optimism, rise and development of democracy. Today, in a very peculiar way, Commission's full name can also be very much connected to the prevention of democracy recession, decline, or decay. Why it is so? For the very simple reason. In order to establish their authoritarian regimes, nowadays autocrats and would-be autocrats don't that much need to use brutal force. They first of all need good lawyers to manipulate rules of the game. Democracies, and especially European democracies today, are most often not under assault of swift coup attempts, but of creeping processes changing its nature most often by the legal actions and laws of the parliaments. Maybe the best way to explain the relevance of electoral integrity is if we put it in a relation, in connection with so-called competitive authoritarian systems. These types of regimes also have elections, and competitive ones. Elections in competitive authoritarian regimes are in many cases not just a charade. They are very often meaningful, and incumbents can lose elections. It has already happened more than once. Milosevic in Serbia, Mečiar in Slovakia, Gruevski in Macedonia, and many more. But what is a crucial feature of these elections is that playing ground is not leveled. It is how Steve Levitsky and Lucan Way describe competitive authoritarian regimes. What exactly means that electoral integrity has been under attack. It is why, for example, Andreas Schedler named this system electoral authoritarianism. This kind of a regime is a dream of any aspiring autocrat today, and it is why institutions of elections are so vibrantly under assault, from them, of course. Unlike the triumphant democracy in the 90s, we have today another new ingredient of our time. A kind of authoritarian international, what Anne Applebaum has recently named Autocracy Inc. Regimes belonging to these groups are always ready to support those forces in European countries that put democracy in danger. It is why in the recent, the Venice Commission has had to indeed examine several laws touching foreign influence upon electoral processes through financial support to certain parties, the cases of Ukraine and Moldova, for example, as well as laws affecting the rules of the game, usually by electoral redistricting or changing conditions to stand for elections, to submit candidates in the electoral districts, like the cases of Hungary and in Turkey. The Venice Commission has had long-established international cooperation in this field. It is reflected in the composition of our Council for Democratic Election. That is the only Commission's three-party body consisted of representatives of the Venice Commission itself, OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, and Congress of Local Communities of Europe. Additionally, observer status in this body has been granted to the ODHR, International IDEA, and IFES. Only in this month plenary session 2 weeks ago, we issued joint opinion of the Venice Commission and ODHR on amendments to the Electoral Code of the Republic of Moldova. and the related law concerning ineligibility of persons connected to political parties that are declared unconstitutional. Unconstitutional because of the direct Russian influence, financial and political. Then, opinion on the draft law on amendments to Article 51 of Rule of Procedure of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine on political liability of members of the parliament associated with political parties whose activities has been suspended. These are just a few examples. All the opinions I mentioned are connected to foreign, in this particular case is clearly Russian interference to the electoral process. Nevertheless, the Commission has understood and approved the party ban in mentioned cases. We have also firmly stand behind European standards in defending individual rights to vote and stand for elections of the members of those parties. In the field of the digital technology, the Venice Commission has issued joint report with the Director of Information Society and Actions Against Crime of the Directorate General of Human Rights and Rule of Law, DG, on the use of digital technologies and elections. We also organized co-organized several conferences on the role of the AI in the elections. Venice Commission approach has always been to promote election integrity and avert threat to electoral process through multi-actor collaboration through human rights compliant regulatory interventions. The defense of electoral integrity will always depend on governments, politicians, traditional media, election management bodies, and citizens. There are many examples of our works in this field, including parliamentary monitoring, together with the Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe. To conclude and to be open for the questions, because we have a restriction in time, international cooperation as such can do its part in averting threats to electoral integrity. Monitoring elections, assisting countries in making better laws, working with constitutional courts to be more rigorous in meeting compliance and protecting electoral rights, educating and training electoral practitioners are all very important steps and activities. But EU elections of 2024, we are very often talking about today, are not only about averting threats to electoral process. It is not only a matter of fine-tuning our protective measures. Assaults to electoral integrity are not a goal to itself. It serves to much more substantial and more dangerous purpose, to alter the very values European Union and European democracies have been founded on. These threats are not coming only from the outsiders, big authoritarian states of our time. They come from our very democracies. So-called illiberal democracy system, xenophobic policies toward others that are not us, political movements of exiters from the EU, extreme nationalism and populism are part of our democracies and aspiring political forces of our time. To avert those threats to European liberal democratic order will require more inventivity than mere protective measures of electoral process. It has been always known that democracy has not an autopilot to protect itself, but can be defended only by Democrats themselves. I will stop here and we'll be happy to take the questions and the comments and whatever. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Darmanovic. I think that this is a quite sobering thought, if I can put it like that leaves quite a lot of job for all of us in this room to do. And we're always extremely interested, of course, in the European Commission by the views of the Venice Commission, who is really one of our absolute key partners. You listed actually quite a lot of the threats, and in particular also the disinformation, the foreign interference. So maybe now, if you allow, we'll turn to Ms. Koch to ask you basically how international cooperation and information sharing strengthen the response to disinformation and foreign interference in the electoral process, according to you.
Thank you very much. Well, obviously it does. The bigger question is to which extent can we reach out? I'm here in my function for the Transatlantic Commission on Election Integrity. Those of you who haven't heard about it, it's a bipartisan group that was founded in 2018 by Anders Fogh Rasmussen, the former NATO chief, and Michael Chertoff, who was in charge of Homeland Security in the US for quite a while, actually to address what had happened in the US and what could happen anywhere else in the world and already happened anywhere else in the world regarding foreign election interference. It's a group that consists of tech, business, political, and media leaders, and basically our job is to raise awareness on foreign interference and to advocate for policies and remedies and best practices that have worked in some countries and may also work in other countries. So when we're talking about sort of transatlantic cooperation, I might have a quick update on our work in the US, which is not very encouraging at the moment. You all follow the news. You will have noticed that election integrity has become a partisan issue in the United States. It's actually, well, challenging to say the least, but it has become toxic because parts of the Republican Party still keep to that legend of the stolen election. So at the moment, raising this at the national, federal, state level is difficult for us. Currently, our colleagues focus on the municipal city mayors level, governors, because they also have the authority and the voice to, of course, raise awareness. On the other hand, we see that currently legislation is promoted and pushed through that is called legislation to, well, push for election integrity when in fact it's actually pushing voters out of the electoral process because it's making it more difficult for them to vote. So that's the update on the US. It's, again, not very positive at the moment, but there's always room for hope. In Europe and the US, and actually on a global level, the Transatlantic Commission is focusing on a tool, quite a lot of tools actually, but our main tool, which we like to call the gold standard for parliamentarians in terms of election integrity, is the Election Integrity Pledge. You can find that on the site electionpledge.eu. There used to be another site which was hacked, and even the provider couldn't sort of unhack it, which actually proves the point that there is a constant threat. And this pledge, which is addressed at candidates who are running for office, actually involves all the threats you just mentioned, from disinformation, foreign interference, foreign financing, and the candidates who do sign this pledge then basically promise to stay clear of all of that. We also included staying clear of deep fakes, so there is an AI element in it already. But running up to the 2024 elections, we're currently in the process of updating the wording of the pledge because we want to make it more generative AI compatible. And we also would like to include a passage about candidates promising to report and to actually inform themselves about the report mechanisms, about the agencies, the institutions that are in charge of when it comes to foreign interference or any suspicion of influence, in charge of handling that. Maybe we can sort of come to that a little later, because I think there is a lot of room for improvement on national and also European level. There are massively diverse standards. Sweden, I think, is on top of it all, but I can't say that Germany, my home country, really is. So far we've had around 500 signatories, which is a lot and isn't at the same time. So we're obviously still promoting and will continue to promote the election pledge. We're going to try to move it more from a campaign towards a community platform, because currently we're very much involved in asking candidates when they are in an electoral campaign to consider the pledge and to sign it. But actually, as has been just mentioned, the interference threat isn't just happening in an electoral campaign, it's actually a constant given. So we're going to try and level up the election pledge to more of a community thing than a campaign thing. I'll just very quickly, because I have a second hat as well as someone in the previous panel, would just like to share a few more thoughts as a journalist. I do realize all of this event is off the record, but given my experience in media and also in the 2021 election where I ran campaign communications for the candidate who didn't win, Armin Laschet, I can't stress enough what Federica Mogherini said this morning, that foreign interference can only be as strong as the weaknesses back home. So in the German parliamentary election, we did see interference. I think the Green candidate, now Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock, got the majority of it because she was most pronounced against Nord Stream. So the malicious online campaigning mostly attacked her, then also Armin Laschet, the candidate I was working for. I wouldn't say it had major influence, nor did, anyway, the media. We were helped by a US NGO, which is called Luminate, which I'm sure many of you know, but some might not. So again, this is, I think, especially Ben Scott, who's in charge of strategy there, is someone to consider when you have an electoral campaign back home, because they try to keep or hold tech platforms to account when it comes to what they should do and what they don't do enough. Again, and I'm saying this as a journalist, I think what probably shocked me most was the amount of sloppy and lazy journalism. So it's easy to just finger point to, I don't know, trolls from St. Petersburg or Iran or wherever they come from, but I think there's a lot of homework to do at home as well. And if you want to reach out afterwards, discussing the election pledge, discussing TCI, or the homework journalists have to do, feel free to do so.
Thank you very much, Ms. Scott. It was very insightful and extremely useful always to bring this transatlantic dimension. In the work that started already years ago in the Commission, one driver, one source of anxiety actually was all the attacks against the Democrat campaign. I think it was back in 2016, again, against Hillary Clinton. And this kind of blueprint of what could be done to destabilize an electoral campaign was something that you wanted to intervene on.
Yes, because you mentioned that campaign, and as we're all off the record, and this is a closed session, I think I can share it. When I met Joe Biden in 2018, that was before he'd actually announced his candidacy. I asked him whether he thought that it was Putin who won it for Trump by being on Facebook, or whether it was Hillary who won it for Trump by not being in Wyoming. And of course, his disclaimer was that no one had, which is true, that no one had campaigned as much as he did for Hillary Clinton, and that he did all he could to make her win this election, but that he also missed the words middle class in most of her speeches. So I think what maybe hasn't been mentioned enough when we're talking about electoral integrity, but some earlier speakers have mentioned it, the groups of people that feel disenfranchised are, I think, even a bigger threat for our democracies than the troll fabrics in firms in St. Petersburg.
Well, thanks.
Sorry.
Thanks a lot for that. And I'm sure that many of those in the room will want to reach out to you after when we're done. But that's also the moment to hand over to Mrs. Pierce-Laanela. And here, can I ask you, can you share your views on how international cooperation can help raise awareness on electoral threats and build a response to them?
Sure, and if we've gone from Europe to transatlantic, I'll go global, if that's okay, since we're talking international cooperation, and I do work for an international organization. We've got members all over the globe, from the Pacific, Africa, South America, and Europe. Many of you in the room are members as well. But what I thought, there's so many parts of international cooperation, but I thought I would focus on the norms building part, because I think that's the one that's most appropriate to think about now with these issues that we're not sure what to do with, these complex issues that we've been discussing today. And so to go, and I know norms building sounds a little bit, it may sound a bit vague or opaque, but if I could just be a bit specific about what norms building is, and why it links with international cooperation. So I'll speak about that, why norms building matters, and which norms we need to work on to fix these problems that we're dealing with right now. International cooperation leads to norms building because when we cooperate with each other, and this room is so gorgeous because people know each other. They've been on observation missions together. They have been on visitors programs to each other's elections. They've been on conferences. They've been part of this network, which has been extraordinary for convening people. And every time you meet, you start to build a shared understanding. So before you walk in, you've got your own way of seeing things, but once you've heard someone else's perspective, you slowly shift. And when you're together enough, and that's where the European Union is so extraordinary, because it creates these opportunities for people to work together a lot, is that by the end, you have this shared understanding, at least, and at best, you have a sense of common purpose, or and a shared vision of where to go moving forward. And that's what norms building is. And shared understandings change behavior. I was just in Tunis last week, and the head of our Tunis office said that her grandparents, her granddad and her dad threw garbage out the window when they were driving. And there was something that happened in the 1990s, and we were just discussing, what was it? Was it civic education? Was it legislation? What was it that meant that people after that, her generation, do not throw garbage out the window? And that's where societal norms can be very powerful. So in the election field, for example, a norm is what we believe to be true, or what we expect to see. And this is the societal norms. So for CSOs, for instance, many in the room, you would expect inclusion is a norm that you expect to see from your elections. For political parties or for candidates, a level playing field and fairness is critical. It's one of those things that you know it when you feel it, and so forth. When those norms are codified, they can turn into a couple of things, and one is professional standards. Professional standards for elections are, for example, impartiality or independence, critically important. And these professional standards guide how we do our work, those who are in the room. Taking care of a secret ballot, ensuring a secret ballot is an example of a professional norm. And then slowly but surely it works its way up to Venice Commission and others, SADC Election Commissioners Forum, SADC Parliamentary Forum, and so forth, and it becomes some kind of a regional norm, and then becomes part of the canon of public international law. And our next panel after this is going to be about election observation. Now, election observers, they observe elections according to obligations that people have signed up for. So think Copenhagen Agreement from the 1990s, for instance. And they themselves follow the Declaration of Principles from 2005-ish. So once these are codified, they become something that you can be held accountable to, and they can even have legal clout. As you know from the Venice Commission, you look at obligations. Unfortunately, at the moment, I would argue that the normative system, the normative framework that we have around elections doesn't hold. It needs to be renewed. And this is why international cooperation becomes so important. And I'd like to point out three particular areas where the normative frameworks that we established, there was an intense period of establishing these norms from 1990 till, say, 2011. And since then, some working in this field, but largely, just say, nothing's been updated on electoral assistance, for example, since 2011. So there's a slow silting up of the irrigation systems that we can imagine to be normative frameworks and mechanisms. The three areas are One is that elections have moved out of a controlled environment, as we've been discussing today, as many were advocating for country voting, advanced voting, ways of bringing voting closer to the population. But this also moves it out of the controlled environment. And the normative standards or the professional standards or what it is we need to be expecting from those are not clear. And when they are not clear, that is when they can be contested. And that's what you were talking about in the United States. You can say stop the steal when you don't have a clear idea of what voting by mail is or looks like, and when there's not a shared understanding of what that should be. So the fact that voting is moving out of a controlled environment is something we have to keep our eyes out for, and we need to create new normative frameworks around how to keep them secure and what we all agree by that. So it isn't, because that is our vulnerable point where we as election officials will be slammed if we get it wrong, or even if we don't get it wrong. As our colleague from Estonia said, they do electronic voting excellently, but it is still contested. So this is one area. The second one is that the assumptions about how elections should be run assumed some kind of continuity, that you could organize elections in your whole country on election day. And this is no longer the case for a couple of reasons. One was the pandemic. So the pandemic showed us that it wasn't possible to open, or it wasn't possible to do things in a way that was normal. And so suddenly all of the laws that existed were suddenly put out of, they became difficult to abide by. Did you postpone? Did you not postpone? And in places where there was a civil discourse, solutions were found. So in France, for example, for the second local elections, there were discussions and solutions were found, legal solutions and so forth. But in others, these became very contested. Now, when we have forest fires raging in one part of a jurisdiction, or where we have floods, as in Pakistan, or an earthquake, as in Turkey, then this is an area where you can be slammed regardless of which type of decision that you take, and there are not normative frameworks to guide this work. And the third one, which wasn't predicted when these normative frameworks were developed, is exactly what we're talking about today, which is the deliberate undermining, deliberate threats to election officials, deliberate looking for problems with the electoral process, because if you lose, then you can point to that later. So deliberate undermining of the electoral process, undermining of institutions, and then most importantly, undermining of the results. And in the end, an accepted result is what you need. So with all this in mind, there's a number of processes underway, and I encourage us all to think about them. I'll just name a few. One is fora exactly like this one, where we start to think through complex issues. And if I could just mention the session before about online political advertising, and advertise our own report, which came out today. I'll put these out with a QR code, but on online political advertising. It is this type of work, what we discussed and also what this report shows, comparatively, how are different ones dealing with it, how should we be thinking about it. So these professional discussions lead eventually to the norms that we need to guide difficult decision making. I want to mention the Summit for Democracy. I know it hasn't been everything that we hoped for, but it is nonetheless a place marker in the calendar that we can lead up to. And I'd like us all to advocate for our own countries to commit to protecting our own election systems from future harm. That is, we may have democratic regimes now, but we may have authoritarian regimes in the future, so we have to protect the independence of our election commissions while we can. And also that sometimes our own election commissions don't have a mandate to work internationally. And so now, recognizing that our problems are transnational, we need to be able to work transnationally. So those are two commitments that our countries should be done. And I've got a few more ideas. I'll just put one in, and that is we should put election commissions very high on the SDG 16 agenda at the UN this summer when the midterm review is happening. And I've got plenty more fora that I'd like to suggest, but I'll leave it for that for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And it's great that there are lots of people with ideas, because as one of you mentioned previously, we have also to be creative to address the threat. So thank you very much to the three of us. Now I think it's time to give the floor to our friend from the Spanish authority. And you are most welcome to join us here on the podium if you wish. Excellent.
Good afternoon to everyone. To start, I would like to congratulate the organizers for this event. It's been really interesting and useful. I am an ECNE member and a representative from Spain, and I would like to give some real and practical examples of international cooperation that show how important and positive international cooperation is, at least as Spain sees it. Firstly, I would like to explain international cooperation within ECNE members. Within ECNE, there is a cooperation procedure, a really easy one, which is usually used between ECNE members, and it's basically scoping questions sent through email. Spain recently used this system to learn best practices in relation to absentee voters living abroad. Maybe you are asking why we need that information. The reason was that Spain's parliament passed an electoral law modification at the end of 2022. From that moment on, all Spaniards living abroad do not have to request their vote anymore. But in contrary, all the electoral documentation will be sent ex officio to their homes abroad. This meant a really important logistic threat to Spain EMBs. This new Article 75 was passed last October 2022 and had to be implemented during the 2023 elections. That means the regional elections we had last May, and the early parliamentary elections we had last July. Well, thanks to this international cooperation within ECNE, and thanks to the excellent participation of all our EU colleagues, we were able to prepare an internal draft report, which has helped us to comprehend how EU members guarantee the vote for absentee voters. For instance, we have discovered some interesting information that has helped us to better organize our voting abroad procedures. Some of this information was that, for instance, 12 member states also sent the electoral documentation ex officio. We at first thought were the only ones. And also 12 guarantee it is a free procedure with no costs for voters. 19 member states use postal voting, as we do, and 22 or also use personal voting, as we do in Spain. This information was really useful and has helped us to implement all these measures in these two elections we have celebrated during this 2023. This cooperation procedure has not only been used by Spain within ECNE, since September 2022, so since this last year, this scoping questions procedure has been used by Croatia regarding electoral silence. My colleague is here. Czechia for presidential candidacy, Estonia for regulation of no-profit association and foundations, and the Netherlands on electoral disputes. And I'm sure they have found it quite as useful as we have found it too. In the case of Spain, we have also complemented some other types of international cooperation by copying some other EU successful models, not only within the ECNE group, but also within European institutions. For instance, in 2009, we created the Coordination Network for Security of Electoral Processes, which was a copy of the network created in the mandate contained in the EU Commission recommendation for the European elections of 2019. Since then, we have activated this network in every Spanish election. In this year, 2023, we have activated the network twice, and it has been really useful too. As a third example of international cooperation, I would like to focus on bilateral international cooperation. This is a really recent example. A few weeks ago, from the 10th to 11th of October 2023, we had a working visit in Spain of the Ukrainian electoral authorities with the help of International IDEA. And they came to Spain to learn our voting abroad best practices and also to see how they could prepare future elections someday. They met with all the electoral administration as well as our Central Electoral Board because our competencies are divided in the case of Spain. But it was really useful for them too and for us because it allowed us also to learn some best practices from them. So in conclusion, as an ECNE member, I would like to highlight that for all these reasons, we consider that international cooperation in all terms is very useful, and we have verified it. We have verified its benefits and also the willingness of other member states to collaborate. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this. Now I'm sure that you are impatient to ask to our excellent panelists a few questions. So who would like to start? This is always a dreaded moment in the conference. So you see the light is coming on you. No? Okay, then if there are no, I would, oh yes, we have, oh fantastic. You make my day.
Hello everybody, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Attila Nagy. I'm the president of the Hungarian National Election Office. And I felt a bit of invocated as I heard about Hungary as a bad example. And I don't want to comment on that. I just want to citate you a statement to be, which is from the ODIHR, International Election Observation Mission, of the last year's parliamentary elections and referendum. And they concluded that the elections and referendum were well administered and professionally managed. Thank you.
If I got it right, that was an example from further in the past, but I don't know.
From last year.
Okay. If you want to intervene, go ahead.
It is, I mentioned the opinion of the Venice Commission on a lot of changes in Hungarian election law in 2022. Some of the changes were improvements, but some were simply evaluated by the Venice Commission as a kind of a setback. Also the context where the changes were, in a way how the changes were approved, Venice Commission pointed out as it should be more inclusive. It was a change of the census for submitting candidates in the electoral districts that was raised from 1/4 to 3/4. In order to have to stand for elections, to submit candidates for the national list, it was pretty excessive percentage that was decided at the time. The participants in the elections actually criticized that as a tool to force the opposition to make one list in order to be competitive. I don't want to comment that. But also the way how it was introduced in the session of the parliament when the state of emergency because of the COVID was introduced in the in the situation that was not maybe enough inclusionary, but that was, as I said, almost year and a half ago. In some other examples, like what the Hungarian colleague mentioned, there was a positive assessment. But I just mentioned the case that happened, and I didn't want to say anything, but that we had an opinion about that kind of redistricting. So that's it.
Okay, you want to step in?
I was just wondering if somebody from Sweden is in the room. Wonderful, because from what I know, but you know much better, I'm sure, apparently in Sweden there is an agency which is dedicated to inform on a citizen level on electoral interference. I think it's called Psychological Defense Agency, and I'd love to hear more about it from a Swede, actually.
Yeah, I'm not sure what I can tell you that you already don't know, but we have, I'm from the Swedish Election Authority, so I'm not from that agency, but we have a new agency started up in the beginning of 2022, which is called the Swedish Agency for Psychological Defense. And their mission is to fight interference from foreign countries. And we cooperate closely in our national election network. We have in Sweden, as many countries already mentioned, a permanent national election network, and we meet about 4 times a year. And it's the Swedish police, it's the Swedish security police, the election authority, the Agency for Psychological Defense, and the Swedish Civil Contingency Agency. And we're sharing our threat analysis. We're right now planning 3 tabletop exercises ahead of the European parliamentary election, working together with the different agencies' missions and sharing information and trying to work out, as we already do, but there's always something that we need to clear out in our missions. So we're trying to work ahead of when something is happening, which it does every day. We have disinformation campaigns ongoing, and also cyber attacks against every election. So I'm not sure, it wasn't that much about their mission, but.
All right, I just have a few things to say about the multiple conversations that are happening here. But on Hungary, I just want to, because I was talking about norm building, I just want to, for those who may not remember, maybe I'm a bit older than some of the people in the room, but the extraordinary role that Hungary played in the norms building in the election management space. So from the 90s, I think, just the extraordinary leadership that came. So Hungary was, that's where the ACEEO was originally harbored, and I remember Zoltán Tóth from that period. Those who organized the elections were very, very innovative, but also really inspired their neighboring countries. And so just a debt of gratitude to the predecessors, all the election administrators that have gone before you. So well done that. And on that point, I just want to reflect on what Alba said about the part about the Ukrainian visit that she had. Now, this, the value, and also the value of this network, this ECNIN network, and it cannot be underestimated. If we think back to the ACEEO and the value that that had, so Hungary was leading at the time, and there were others around who weren't that far ahead. But their ability to meet and learn regularly was incredibly valuable for those who weren't as far ahead to get up to speed. And so I'd really encourage that those in the enlargement area be invited as observers where appropriate to the meetings like this one. It really, really makes a difference to have exposure to the kinds of debates that we're having here. So I just wanted to make that point. On Anna's point about the cooperation, I think that's an example of cooperation working really well. But I want to put on the table, maybe others have experienced it here, because we work globally. I won't hang out which countries it is that I've heard this from. But there can be a slight cultural difference when you work with other authorities. So because of the situation we're in now, whether it's the pandemic and you have to work with health authorities, whether it's cybersecurity issues and you have to work with cybersecurity or you have to work with the security forces, there can be, or even if there's a forest fire and you have to work with those authorities, there can be different values, here again talking about norms, between those different organizations. So there, with the health authorities, sometimes it worked incredibly well, and sometimes it really didn't work well at all. So electoral principles of maximum inclusion, maximum involvement, and so forth worked against public health policies about people's safety. They were just values colliding. And this is happening also sometimes with security forces. So where the CODIS or the modus operandi of election administration is openness, err on the side of inclusion, transparency, and so forth. For security forces, it may be, keep things secret. So this morning, for example, there was the discussion about if you have malign actors, expose them. And whether to be open about those attacks or not is one of those debates that's happening in those types of interagency cooperation in different parts of the world at the moment. So it's like a kind of a values. Interagency cooperation is excellent and needed, but there is always going to be a bit of a values dance that goes on in those interagency meetings, because agencies have different mandates and different cultures.
What I just love about this Swedish example is that I think Swedes don't just have a go-to place when it comes to electoral interference, but they also know about it. At least they know about it a lot more than I would say Germans do. And that psychological defense agency had a video clip campaign on a very, very well done sort of citizen level communications. And we have go-to places in Germany as well, but I wouldn't be sure that even the candidates running for office know whom to approach when they suspect a malign actor or something happening. And regarding your point on transparency, when the Bundestag was hacked, and I don't think that was a matter of sort of interagency cooperation, but it wasn't hushed up either. But there wasn't much talk about it. I'm not sure whether that was because people felt ashamed or they didn't want to, I don't know, entice any other actors to try the same. If we look to the Netherlands, where something sort of similar happened, they were very open about it, and I personally prefer the Dutch way, because the more you talk about threats and even sort of things that have gone wrong, the more awareness it creates that this could happen to you too, and in the end, I think it helps defend and stabilize our security mechanisms. But that's what I meant when I said that levels differ massively within the European Union.
Thank you very much for this. You wanted to come back? Yes, the numbers are starting to flash in red, but I think we still have a few minutes.
Maybe we have no time, but I have one question for Teresa. Just recently, it was published an article in Journal of Democracy of, I believe, your colleague from International IDEA. It is not about international cooperation. It's about how to be inventive in meeting divisions and polarizations in liberal democracies, about introducing new voting technique calling reverse vote. So that voters can also use their votes to vote against someone. Not, she believes that it will moderate the approach of the political parties because they can lose the votes of that kind, and that because she says that protest votes go to most often to the most extreme parties, actually weakening the center and making the societies more polarized. It's one, I mean, peculiar idea. Maybe I just wanted to ask you, what do you think about it?
Yes, I can highly recommend an article by my colleague Kimana, who's very, very wise. Yes, she works with our constitution building team and not with elections, but this was something that was on her mind. And I think my comment to her, because of course I got to see a copy before she sent it out, and was that we have to be, I love creativity. And that's how you see things forward. And you should see, because I have access to ballot papers globally, there are the strangest examples of electoral systems out there. And people think they're perfectly normal where they are. And maybe the closest is the none of the above option, which exists, which is a little bit different from reverse. But you've also got the preferential voting where you kind of, in a way, are starting to rank. So I think these kind of different ways of expressing what you believe are coming out there. So I like that. My one worry, and this is what I did mention to her, is that you can't solve societal problems with technical solutions. And so if there are politicians who don't behave well, it doesn't really matter what electoral system that you have. So that was one point that I made. Another point is that people don't like change very much. So even though you've got the strangest systems out there where one would think that the other was strange and vice versa, but if you're accustomed to the system that you have, changing it, especially in this environment where there is somebody who's ready to undermine it, changes in any direction will be undermined by somebody or will be pointed out as there will be a conspiracy theory about any change you introduce, basically. There is nothing, where election administration used to be under the radar, it is no longer under the radar. So any change you introduce will turn toxic very quickly, unfortunately, in this environment. However clever the system is. But I love the fact that she's putting it out there, exactly for this kind of a discussion.
Thank you very much. I think we are coming to the end of this session. So I really would like to thank the three of you, as well as our colleague from the Spanish presidency, and all of you who intervene in this quite lively debate. So please come with me and give them a big round of applause.
Thank you very much. I invite you to stay here since you're going to moderate the next session.
I'm not fired yet.
So that's for you. So thank you very much to all three of you. And, and we're going to move on with our last discussion of the day, but by no means the least. A fair and transparent electoral process requires observation, and we need voters to be able to observe the process so that they have more trust in it. So this particular panel now will discuss the emerging trends that have been observed and the challenges that we are facing in the context of the EU. So we're, leaving somehow the more international scene and focusing back onto the EU level. And to do so with us this afternoon, we have Megan Fitzgerald, who's head of the Election Department Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights at the OSCE. We have also Armin Rabic, who's chair of Election Watch EU, and Anna Mihailovic, who's president of the European Network of the Election Monitoring Organization. Welcome to all three of you, and now you know our moderator.
I love the music. I feel like a news anchor on CNN, so big promotion for me today. But I think the topic was introduced already quite well. I think we would probably all agree around this room that election observation is something that improves accountability and public trust in the elections. And that is also engaging more the citizens with the electoral process. So encouraging the election observation, including by citizen, organization, and international observer, fosters the transparency and the accountability that the system needs. But now we have really the pleasure of having three highly distinguished experts on the matter. So I will stop here and really ask you, starting with you, Mrs. Fitzgerald, about your experience, your insight, and what you could share with this assembly. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting ODIHR to contribute to this discussion. It's a pleasure to see so many colleagues here and so many election management officials that we have cooperated with and observed in the past. I think it was important that we have this topic on the agenda today because it recognizes the value that observation can bring, both that of citizen or non-governmental observation and international observation. We have seen more and more, we have seen more and more being agreed at the EU level, and the implementation of these directives and recommendations can surely benefit from independent assessment, further to the independent assessments that have been done on previous elections. And I'm sure we'll hear more about that from our colleagues on the panel. International observation or observation in general can look at the uniformity of the application of these decisions being taken at the EU level, and what limitations and conflicts does a national legislation provide. It's a unique opportunity for us to review the legislation of all 27 for compliance with EU directives and regulations and recommendations. It also allows us to look at how we can formulate recommendations for what can be done to bring more consistency into the application of the framework agreed on. And ODIHR regularly observes in EU member states, as many of you know, as you've been observed by us. Actually, last year, I frequently used the statistics that we observed in majority of our election observations last year were in EU member states. And some were surprised to hear that because the formats of our observation missions often vary. From small expert teams to larger full-blown election observation missions like in Hungary last year. Unfortunately, however, only 8 out of the 27 members states ensure in their legislation the participation of citizen observers, international observers, and observation by party or contestant representatives. A few more, 4, to be specific, have provisions for international observation only. As ODIHR, EU states have always facilitated our observation, so that is welcomed, but even where it's not provided by law. But this leaves citizen observation or observation by non-governmental organizations non-regulated and potentially excluded from the process. And their contribution is very important, which we'll also hear more from my colleagues. I think it's important to emphasize, and you already did mention transparency, but international or observation in general, I tried to keep saying observation in general, but we are all international observers, but I don't want to underestimate the value of citizen observation as well. But many of the issues that have been discussed here today and raised here today can be looked at and assessed by an observation mission. And it's already been, I already mentioned the consistency of practices and compliance of national legislation, but also transparency and trust in the process. On a side note, we heard this morning that the aggression of the campaign and the impact it has on women's participation is a big concern of some for the upcoming EP elections. And in Odir's observation, we can see that there is definitely a growing trend in the use of aggressive, intolerant rhetoric, and we do agree it is having an impact on women's participation. But back to Odir's observation, and just in conclusion, our plans for the upcoming European parliamentary elections is that we are conducting a needs assessment mission for the elections. And this needs assessment mission will logically include a large component here in Brussels, talking to EU institutions, but we will also be visiting a few countries to help determine whether our observation is needed. And it's on the basis of this mission's findings that we will determine the format of any potential ODIHR observation. In the past, we have done needs assessment missions consistently, but we've only observed in 2009. And as I started off by saying, a lot more has been agreed on at the regional level, and the application of those agreements would be something that would be very interesting for us to look at. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fitzgerald. That was extremely useful, and what I take also from your intervention is that more can be done, or at least that we're not in a situation of perfection, that there is room for progress. So I think that makes a good transition also to the intervention of Ms. Mihailovic. To tell us a bit from your long experience in the field of electoral observation, what would be your key takeaway also from observing the 2019 European elections, and if you can share ideas on the added value of citizens' participation ahead of the elections next year.
Yeah, I think there is a slight confusion now, but
we didn't observe.
You explain.
We didn't observe election 2019. So thank you for inviting me. I will talk a little bit. I will try to explain, because I meet today with a lot of colleagues and here in the room, and try to present what is the animal. So I will use this first opportunity a little bit to present animal, and then to explain why we think it's really important to have citizen observation. And after that to conclude, and of course we'll be open for the questions. And then my colleague who had this needs assessment mission for the European will actually continue. First, as I said, a word about European Network of Election Monitoring Organization. So ANEMO is an international network composed of 22 civil society organizations from 18 countries, from Central and Eastern Europe, from Western Balkan, Caucasian, and Central Asia. So this includes 3 organizations from EU countries. So the main focus of the organization is deployment of international election observation missions to assess electoral environment, while promoting civil society involvement towards improving electoral processes, greater transparency of governments and their accountability to citizens, and respect of the basic human rights and freedoms. So ANEMO has deployed 40 missions in over 10 countries, engaged thousands of observers, and delivered numerous reports with aim to assist states in the region to improve their electoral environment. So in particular, we have here a colleague from ODIHR, but we have somehow different but complementary approach, because we are deploying experts and observers who are civil society activists and electoral experts in their own countries. So promoting such diverse exchange of experience and points of view actually has allowed us to deliver assessments and recommendations from international and citizens' perspective, putting the voters' rights, election integrity, and which is really important, public trust in elections in the center of our efforts. So, therefore, it's really important to remind that civil society organizations play a crucial role in promoting fundamental rights and contributing to the functioning of the democracy. In that sense, civil society organization, especially when it comes to election day, is one form of the right to independent scrutiny of the voting and counting process, and as illustrated in EU Human Rights Committee comment. However, civil society observers' roles go beyond only election day observation, as their role is also really important when it comes to observing of pre-election period and post-election period, and issues which can be related to the right to stand for elections, voters' rights, media environment, campaign finance, and right to legal remedy. So, unfortunately, from our point of view, CSO and activists, including in some EU states, face an increasing amount of physical and verbal attacks, intimidation and harassment by non-state actors. So this type of incidents may happen both online and offline and has a different effect on civil society monitors. In some cases, even state officials have engaged in verbal attacks and created negative narratives to stigmatize civil society organization or discredit their work. So this is harmfully both for the support base for the CSOs in society, but also has huge psychological impact and discourage civil activists. So we can also all agree that it's really important for public officials to refrain from attacks against civil society organizations, including verbal attacks, and unfounded attempts to discredit organizations that promote human rights, non-discrimination, and free and fair elections. So let us remember that civil society organization and election monitors can play a different role in increasing trust in the processes and outcomes of elections. So one of the positive effects, this can lead us to increase in citizen awareness, better informed voters, and more public trust in democracy. So the role which CSO plays is crucial in terms of voter education, awareness raising, and broad information campaign about the importance of elections, which can lead us to increase interest in public life and participation, with what actually previous participants also mentioned as a problem. So on another note is throughout the course of observation missions, NMO observed the lack of uniform legislative norms when it comes to domestic civil society observers. Several EU countries, and my colleague actually also mentioned, do not have specific legal status for such observers, which means that they cannot observe at the polls on election day. This is a major challenge, and unfortunately, presence of international observers only compensate this gap rather than fully address this issue. This is detrimental not only from the perspective of citizens' observation and from the perspective of civil society in general, but also for electoral stakeholders, including electoral management bodies. How? So it is known fact that election administration benefits from the recommendation issued in the final reports of EOM, such ODIHR, and NMO, and others. So in the same way, they could actually benefit from recommendation from domestic observers, but not allowing domestic observation. Key electoral stakeholders are deprived of opportunity to better improve legislation, practices, and bring their electoral environment more in line with international democratic standards. So I'm just finishing. So in light of upcoming 2024 EU Parliament elections, member states should consider ahead of those electoral cycles to provide amendments to their legislation to facilitate citizens' observation and use this as a way to enhance transparency and accountability of elected officials. So in times of democratic crises, such as those we are currently facing, governments need to remember that democratic legitimacy comes from their citizens. And this is true both on a national level and European level. this can have, in our opinion, significant impact on the perception, public trust, and credibility of elections. So to conclude, this could be opportunity for reviewing recommendations from international observers and taking them into account ahead of the elections. So these improvements are fundamental in order to fully ensure integrity, transparency, and credibility of election, as ANEMO and others have recommended in the past. Thank you. I'm open for the questions.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Mihailovic. That's also extremely important, and I also take your point about the need also for the member states to protect the civil society and allow them for doing their job. So now I will do something I should have done from the start, which is to put my glasses on, because you gave the right answer, but I gave you the wrong question. So now I will ask again the question to its rightful owner, if I can put it like that, about your main takeaway of the 2019 European elections and your observations for the 2024. So Mr. Rabic, floor is yours, and again, apologies for this mishap.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's the last session, so be patient with us. It's a pleasure being here, and thank you for inviting Election Watch EU to share its experience during the 2019 elections, where we, as international election observers who have been trained by OSCE, ODIHR, and by the European Union as international election observers, brought back this knowledge to the European Union Parliament elections in 2019. So it was the first comprehensive assessment of the European Parliament elections, and I also would like to thank you as the election management bodies to cooperate with our observers on the ground. Now, in my presentation, I would like to go into 3 topics and 3 questions. Why is citizen-led election observation important? And Anna already answered most of that. And second, what is the takeaway of Election Watch EU from the 2019 elections? And this comparative analysis has been shared with you in the briefing pack. And then, as a third question, what can be done by EU member states and election management bodies ahead of the 2024 elections? Firstly, why is citizen-led election observation important? And election observation has become a common practice in international politics and is widely perceived as an instrument to safeguard electoral integrity. The EU and its member states have deployed election observers all over the world and continued developing methodology, and election observation has become a global norm. Yeah, it has helped to achieve electoral integrity or to promote electoral integrity outside the European Union. But there's also what is now called a Declaration of Principles for international observers, but there's also a Declaration of Principles for non-partisan election observers, which has been agreed upon ahead in front of the United Nations. So this means that there is already some kind of a gold standard about what kind of observers are serious about their business in terms of professionalism, impartiality, and proper conduct. Citizen-led election observers reveals shortcomings. They provide recommendations, and they also show good practices. Yeah, we have been trying in the past to also showcase that in our comparative analysis on, for example, on persons with disability in European elections. This was just one example. Citizen-led election observation is also an early warning mechanism, and it's not by chance that 10 years ago in Austria we started to get interested in it, because we really felt as election observers, okay, there's something at stake at home where our democracy is under threat from within and also from outside. So it gives the possibility to the citizens also interested in democratic practices, this possibility to get engaged, to contribute without being active in party politics. So strong democracies are built on trust of the citizens in the electoral processes. And this trust is built through recurrent professional conduct of elections, as you all know. But it's also built on transparency and inclusion of civil society and election observers. Recently, we have seen a deterioration of the trust in elections, also in EU member states. We have seen that especially in 2 Eastern European countries. And election observation can help to instill trust through participation and provides oversight. And this is in line with UN standards and European standards as safeguarded by the UN Human Rights Committee and the Venice Commission of the Council of Europe. So, member states and election management bodies benefit by proactively taking up the recommendations by election observers, not only by OSCE ODIHR, as outlined by Megan, but also by citizen-led election observers. Like in Austria, we have gone into more detail and we came up with 38 recommendations, so it's a lot more. And it goes into more detail and it probably also touches upon processes and provides good practices from international conduct. Now, let me go and come to the second question. What is the takeaway of Election Watch during the election assessment mission in 2019? So we conducted that across all 28 back then EU member states. And we collected a lot of electoral good practices from member states, but we also saw a lot of scope for improvement and where member states can learn from each other in terms of good practices. And for example, in 2019, Election Watch asked for accreditation from each and every member state's election management body, but we only received accreditation in 12. So this means coming to the 2024 elections, there are some recommendations in this respect. So we presented our findings and recommendations not only to the European Parliament Constitutional Committee, but also to the European Cooperation Network on Elections at several locations. And we continue advocating for electoral reforms to bring also EU member states' electoral practices in line with international standards and regional commitments. So let me give you a few examples of recent elections. Like in Hungary, observers associated with Election Watch were not accredited because there's no legislation in place for citizen-led election observers. In Poland, just last week, election observers were accredited late in the day, although the civil society carried such a big responsibility and was so strongly engaged in upholding and defending democracy in Poland. And in Austria, while we have achieved a lot and some of our recommendations have been taken on in a recent electoral amendment, legislators still have not acknowledged election observation and have not changed the law respectively to, for us to be accredited on during elections as election observers. So as election observers, we are closely following also what is happening in the United States, and we are deeply concerned about it. So a lot has been talked already about the multiple challenges of disinformation, like deepfakes, generative AI used for micro-targeting, and malintended outside interference. And in this respect, also citizen-led election observers have a role and can be an ally of election management bodies to be early warning mechanism to provide an idea about what kind of trends and threats are coming their way. So in this sense, we would like for election management bodies to see also citizen-led election observers as an ally and a partner in fighting common threats and to strengthen democratic resilience within electoral processes. That brings me to my last question. What can be done by EU member states and election management bodies ahead of the European Parliament elections 2024? And here we have, together with other civil society organizations, published SEED's policy paper, which has been presented in the European Parliament. And this focuses on enhancing the integrity of the European Parliament elections and focuses on transparency, accountability, inclusion, and equality. But it also looks into the risks and opportunities which are there. What we recommend, and This is mostly in the discretion of the election management bodies, is to come up with secondary legislation ahead of the 2024 elections to provide accreditation for citizen-led election observers. This accreditation should be provided in time ahead of the elections. It should be available on a website where it can be easily found also by foreign election observers. And it would be good to cover that the whole electoral process, not only election day, but also sensitive aspects like the tabulation or the data management of election management bodies. Now, from the observer organization side, Election Watch EU further recommends that any organization observing the upcoming European elections should adhere to the Declaration of Principles and to the Code of Conduct of Election Observers. This would provide some safeguarding against fake observers. To conclude, Election Watch advocates to strengthen democratic resilience and enhance electoral integrity within EU member states by allowing impartial citizen-led election observation throughout the electoral process. We stand ready to provide additional information, share good practices, and provide specific recommendations to all election management bodies. We are already working on a pre-election assessment mission, which we will lead to a comprehensive election assessment mission of the 2024 European Parliament elections. In this context, we are looking forward to a fruitful cooperation before, during, and after these crucial elections. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I thought it was extremely interesting also what you, all of what you mentioned, but the idea to see the citizen-led election observer as partner and allies against threat. I think this is really what the core of what it is about, is a common undertaking to fight this threat. And also you added this sort of guarantee, if I may say, of the declaration of principles, so that we're all reassured that the observers are real observers. That I think is a very powerful message. So now, before we come to the question and answer, I think we had two presentations, one by the Romanian delegate and one by the Estonian. So if I can call maybe our Romanian friend first, and you're most welcome to join us here on the podium. What's the music?
Merci, Monsieur le Directeur, Mesdames et Messieurs, chers collègues.
Dear Director, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, the transparency of electoral processes is one of the key elements to strengthen the trust of citizens in elections. And the observation of elections is one of the main means to guarantee integrity, transparency, and above all, credibility of the electoral processes. Romania is one of the European Union members that has regulated the accreditation both for the national observers as well as for the international observers. And hence, with regard to the observation of the elections, the standing election authority can accredit non-governmental organizations whose purpose is to stand for democracy and human rights, as well as to observe the Romanian media institutions. So these have the possibility to observe all the electoral procedures because they are accredited by the standing electoral authority according to a very transparent procedure. And among the people who are allowed.
Se retrouvent ainsi les délégués des
Among the
partis
people that are
politiques,
accredited,
d'alliances politiques
there are
ou électorales,
political
et
party
d'organisations
members,
des
political
citoyens
alliances or
roumains
electoral
appartenant aux
alliances
minorités
and
nationales.
organizations of
L'accréditation
Romanian
leur est
citizens
accordée
belonging
par
to the
le
national
bureau
minority.
électoral
The
de
accreditation
circonscription
is granted
selon une
through the
procédure
electoral offices
établie par le
and
bureau
in
électoral
accordance with the
central.
procedure
Les
set
personnes
by the
accréditées
Central
peuvent
Election
assister
Office. The
aux
accredited
opérations de
persons
vote le
can
jour des élections
attend the
à partir
voting
de 6
operation
heures
the day
du
of the
matin
election,
et
and this
jusqu'à la
right from
fermeture
6
du bureau
a.m.
de
until the
vote
closing of the polling
et la
station.
signature
And
par les membres du bureau de vote
signature, the
du
signing by
processus
the polling
verbal
station
de
members of the verification report
constatation des résultats du
of the
vote.
results.
Les personnes
The
accréditées
accredited
ne peuvent
people
en aucune manière
can in no
intervenir
way
dans les
interfere
l'organisation
in the
et le
organization
déroulement
and the
des
way the
élections,
elections are
mais
taking
elles
place.
ont le droit
But they
de
have
savoir,
the right
de saisir par
lodge
écrit
a
le président
complaint
du
in
bureau du vote
writing
en
to
en
the
cas d'une
president of the
irrégularité,
polling station in case of
précisément
unfair
parce que les
processes.
observateurs doivent garder leur
Indeed, the
impartialité.
observers have
Il
to
est
remain
interdit tout
neutral.
acte de
Thereof,
propagande
it is
électorale
prohibited
sous peine de
to
suspension de
make any
l'accréditation
propaganda.
par le bureau de vote
Otherwise, they
et
could be
d'exclusion
suspended of the
immédiate
accreditation
des
by
personnes
the polling
concernées,
station that could be
du
immediately
bureau du
expelled
vote. Par exemple,
of
les
the polling
élections du
station. For
Parlement
example, as
européen
to the European
ayant lieu
Parliament
en
elections
2019,
that took place in
l'autorité
2019,
électorale permanente
the
a
permanent standing
accrédité
electoral
21
authority accredited
organisations
21
non-gouvernementales
non-governmental
et
organizations
110
and
institutions
110
médiatiques de Roumanie,
media institutions
ainsi
of
que
Romania, as well as
140 observateurs
140
externes
external observers
et
and
représentants
external
externes des
representatives
médias
of
étrangers
foreign media
qui ont
were
été
present
présentes
in
dans 600 bureaux de vote au
627
moment de
polling
leur
stations
ouverture,
when these
dans
were opened.
2600 bureaux de vote pendant toute la
And
journée
in
du déroulement du scrutin,
2,547 polling stations
dans
during
500
the
bureaux de
voting
vote à l'heure
proceeding,
de leur fermeture
and in
et du dépouillement
577
du
polling
bulletin de
stations when
vote.
they closed.
Toujours
And they also
pour
interfered in the counting
accroître
of the
la
votes.
transparence,
And for
lors
the
des
sake of
derniers
reinforcing
scrutins généraux
transparency,
en Roumanie, l'autorité
at the occasion
électorale
of the
permanente a
latest
accordé 1080 accréditations,
voting
dont
procedure
30
in Romania,
observateurs
the Standing Electoral
internationaux,
Authority accredited
26 étant des
194
représentants de l'Organisation
people.
pour
Among them, 30 international
sécurité et la
observers and
coopération en
26
Europe,
being representatives
présentes
of the
donc
Organization
environ,
for Security and
qui
Cooperation in
ont été
Europe.
présentes dans
And they were
presque
present
500
in almost
500
500
bureaux de vote
polling
où
stations
ils ont
where
pu
they could
constater le bon déroulement des
notice the
opérations
smooth
de vote.
functioning of the voting
Roumanie,
operations.
4
In Romania,
types de
there are
scrutin,
4 types of
élections
polling.
européennes,
The European
élections
elections,
locales,
the local
élections
elections,
présidentielles
the
et
presidential
les élections
elections, and
générales
general
seront
elections
organisées au cours
will
de
be
l'année
organized
2024.
throughout the year
Afin
2024.
d'accroître la transparence des
In order to
processus
reinforce the
électoraux
transparency
et
in
de
electoral processes
renforcer
and to
la
strengthen
confiance des
the
électeurs,
confidence of the
l'autorité
voters,
électorale
the Standing
permanente se
Electoral
propose
Authority
d'attirer un nombre encore plus important
would
de
like
personnes
to have a
impliquées dans
higher
la
number
mission
of
d'observation
people to
électorale.
act as observers.
Finalement, je félicite la Commission
So I
européenne
congratulate
pour
the
bien
European
organiser
Commission
cette
for
conférence.
the very good
Et je
organization of this
profite
conference,
aussi
and I would
de
also
cette
like to take
occasion
this
pour vous
opportunity
inviter en
to
Roumanie
invite you to
à
come to
participer en
Romania
tant
to take part
qu'observateur
as
aux prochaines
observers
élections,
in the
y
future
compris pour le
elections,
Parlement européen.
including
Je vous
at the
remercie
occasion of
beaucoup
the
pour
elections
votre
of the
attention.
European Parliament. Thank you very much for your
Merci
attention.
beaucoup. Et merci pour l'invitation.
Thank you very
qui
much,
est
and thank you
faite
for
de nous
inviting us
rejoindre en
to
Roumanie.
go to Romania.
Now I will leave the floor to the colleague from Estonia. So please, welcome on the podium.
Thank you for the musical introduction. I'm going to briefly, hopefully for not too long, talk about observation practices in Estonia. So in Estonia, the election law states that all the procedures, all the election committees should be public, and also all the documents, and also the vote counting. So stemming from that, the election law, although it covers the main observation rules, observation in polling stations is viewed basically as everyone's right. So we don't actually require registration or accreditation, but the law just states that in order to observe, you have to go to the polling station and introduce yourself, and that's it, and you can commence the observation. So for international observers, we do register observers, but it's more of an informal registration in order to provide an opportunity to participate in the observation program. So here we have a kind of a hands-off approach, but in contrast, if we're talking about new voting technologies, then the situation is quite different there, because while we can assume that a person in the polling station understands what's going on, then internet voting, which is observed in Estonia as far as voting technologies go, is a much more complex subject, and you cannot expect that the person can just walk in and understand what's going on, what's on the screen. So therefore here we offer a separate observation training course for anyone who is interested, so they can understand the basic principles of the system, how it works. We also run a full playthrough of the e-voting process, explain what's going on, so that they once the voting procedures start, that they can observe it, and that it can be indeed a meaningful observation. And we also, during the program, we also actually all the voting procedures are part of that observation program as well. So there may be two most important proceedings: the creation of the private and public key of the system and the vote count. So in order to see the system at work, you have to present that at both events. Of course, there is another question where observation ends and auditing and verifiability starts. So we do not rely only on observers to ensure that that the system is shown or proven to work as intended. So we also use auditors. We provide individual vote verification for the voters, and also, as far as auditing goes, it is, in theory at least, for the observers also possible to write their own auditing application and verify the internet votes by running the application and using the vote counting proof issued by the system. Of course, it's not a simple task to write your own auditing application. I know I couldn't do it, but if you have the skills, you can indeed write your own app. So some challenges that we have. So when I said that everything is public by law, then there is one notable exception, which is the voter list and the data in the voter list. So when we would like to give observers unlimited access to internet voting system, so we still have to keep in mind that we cannot reveal voter information, whether and when the voter has voted. So that limits the observation somewhat. So you cannot, for example, observe how the ballots go to the virtual ballot box. So they are the integrity of the ballot box is verified differently, but this specific procedure you cannot observe directly. Also one question is that observers, well, they have different motives to observe. So some of them, as you know, internet voting is somewhat controversial. So some of them are very motivated in challenging the internet voting. And here the law, and this has been confirmed by the Supreme Court, stipulates that you cannot submit complaints based on popular or public interest. So the criteria is that your own rights have been breached in some way. So therefore, these complaints mostly are returned based on formal grounds, and this certainly creates some friction amongst observers or skeptics of internet voting. Also, in terms of international observation, so international observation usually centers on election day, but like I said, the procedures start a lot earlier, especially when we talk about internet voting. So maybe we should think about creating a special course for the international observers as well. So we still have a lot of work to do, but all in all, I think the response to observation of internet voting has been quite positive. We have also, for the past two elections, transmitted all the procedures over Microsoft Teams, so they are observable. You don't have to be on site, but you can also observe this from a computer. Okay. I'll stop here. If you have any questions, then you can, of course, ask me later. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this detailed presentation and for all the concrete examples. I must say I was personally particularly interested also in the observation of electronic voting, which I think is something that I don't know if it will be the future, but at least it's something which is a novelty, if I can put it like that. So now this is the moment. If you have questions, if you want to intervene, go ahead, maybe as the icebreaker.
I wouldn't mind reacting a little bit. It was great to hear from both the Estonian colleagues and the Romanian colleagues. They are indeed two of the 8 that do provide in their laws for citizen and international observation. I wanted to pick up on a point that my colleague Armin made about, and he subtly made it, but maybe I would make it a little bit more directly, that you all do send your citizens to observe in other countries. And so therefore, it's imperative that you, in order to stand behind the observations in other countries, it's imperative that you also open yourselves to observation. In OSCE participating states, the percentage of states that do provide in their laws and their practices for international and citizen observation is much higher outside of the EU than it is inside the EU. Now, some of you do take informal measures to allow for observation, and I think that's what Armin was saying, informal or through secondary legislation, if you can take those steps before the upcoming elections. In terms of our observation, I will deviate from my Estonian colleague concluded with, that our focus is actually not on election day. Most often in EU countries, it's on the environment and the context and the preparations for elections in advance. And we have had the pleasure of observing internet voting in Estonia, and in observing the elections in Romania. But again, in most EU countries, the focus is on the pre-electoral environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this. Any questions from the floor? Yes, I see a hand in the back.
Thank you. My question will be to Mr. Rabic. You were mentioning your concerns about the trends you see online, deepfakes, disinformation towards the 2024 US presidential elections. And you also mentioned that there is some kind of early warning that you find or would find very useful to raise these concerns and address them in a timely manner. So my question is, what do you consider could be the most effective way to address these kind of concerns, and when you spot these trends online, to share it with our allies in other countries, in this sense, United States of America? And what role do you see for the rapid alert system that exists? Is there a way for you, being the third actor, to perhaps use it? Or how could this rapid alert system, the EAS, NATO, G7 kind of coordination mechanism, be potentially used to raise those concerns in a targeted way to address them as quickly as possible? Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you very much for these complex questions. You know, I think some panels already discussed how to react or how to prevent malintended interference and detect disinformation, whether that's deep fakes. So it's what I wanted to say is really that if we look at the United States, that we see a new trend where electoral results which are accurate are questioned by candidates and losers in the elections. So I think that is the worrying trend for us, and it might also come to the European Union sooner or later. Yeah, so we need to be prepared for that, that there will be a critique on the conduct, and it might deteriorate the trust we have in our electoral management bodies or the electoral processes we have. So, and this, as we know, and you're aware of that, trust is a very difficult quality to achieve, and it's very easy to lose it. Yeah, and I think what is happening in the US now is that there is a gambling with this trust in the electoral conduct, and what we fear in 2024, it is probably worsening, yeah, with one presidential candidate questioning the result of the past election. Now, coming back to your second question, and there, I just want to repeat what I said in my presentation. We need to partner, and that's also I think what Alexandre said before. We need to join forces and partner, whether that's EMBs with civil society, but also EMBs among each other within Europe and beyond, to identify common threats and how those malintended interference is working in order to be prepared to prevent it. Yeah, that also means we need to understand how to detect, for example, deep fakes. You know, there's this discussion in the AI Act, okay, we need to have a watermark of whatever content there is, but we also need to share this information with the voters and the citizens, that they are prepared to understand not everything they see is truth. Yeah, and we also need to work with the media and cooperate with the media and train journalists to understand their responsibility in this sense. And here, probably there's a bigger discussion, which is probably also now happening in the trilogue about the transparency and targeting of political advertising regulation. How we keep the responsibility, or how to beef up the responsibility of online platforms and social media networks. Who is responsible for the moderation of content? Yeah, and somebody needs to be responsible for the moderation of content. And I think this is an important question to ask, because there needs to be, on the one hand, the assurance that there's a freedom of speech upheld, but at the same time, we need to prevent that our democratic principles are threatened. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this comprehensive answer. Any other questions from the floor? Oh, yes. Our former panelist, very good.
Thank you so much. But I'll just pick one thing, which was the trust issue and thinking about the United States and the challenges that they have ahead. One thing that we're noticing with the politicization of election administration is that if you land something that, I mentioned it when I intervened before, that something that used to be under the radar is suddenly political. So if I give the example of Poland during the pandemic, if you said that moving to a postal vote was a good thing, that was seen as political, or if you said it was a bad thing, it was seen as political. And in the United States, it was the exact opposite side of politics. So suddenly, how you landed on postal voting became like a hot potato, like it puts you on one or the other side of a political divide. And I think this is going to be difficult as we move forward for if we're going to, there's going to be multiple views on whether a process was credible or not. We had Arne describing in Estonia, they're so careful and they describe exactly, I had the privilege of seeing the electronic voting being described, and it was done so well. There was actually a person who explained everything as the code was going so that even normal people could understand it. But if we look at Maricopa County in Arizona, for instance, that there were alternative versions of, there were auditors. So Arne was saying that they had not only observers but also auditors. But in Arizona, they had auditors who weren't auditors. Armin, you spoke about fake observers, but there were, auditors who had a political agenda but called themselves auditors. I forget what they were called, cyber or something. And so it becomes this, which of these competing narratives is the one that you can trust? And so your own trustworthiness as an organization, if you are the Carter Center or the OSCE, becomes your capital, or even if you're the election management body, if you are the Indian Election Commission, as you said, your trust, it takes a long time to build up, and it disappears very, very quickly. And in this environment where anything can be amplified, in a moment by saying this or that about an electoral process, suddenly that trust disappears. And I think that's, so what I'm noticing in our community more broadly, I don't mean perhaps the people in the room, but I'm thinking colleagues in the United Nations, or those who might normally have been quite vocal about issues going on, are starting to self-censor because of this nervousness of saying something wrong or saying something that lands you on one side or another. So all this to say is that I think we're in a very, very complicated area moving forward, where the trust in our own organizations is at stake every time we open our mouths. And And one thing on that as well is not only is it the things we put out on social media or that we know publicly, but with artificial intelligence now, I don't know if you've all experienced it, but in our meetings, there's now these bots that go into your meeting and offer to do the meeting notes. So you can be doing an internal meeting at your organization, and the notes come out, and it's a service, but then those notes can be provided to anybody who thought they were going to be at the meeting. So suddenly, meetings where you might have spoken a little bit openly, you just realize that, okay, those notes can go out, somebody could be trawling them, and they can suddenly be out there. And I think this is going to lead to even more self-censorship. And election commissions, for instance, they need to be transparent, yes, but they also need to have honest conversations about stuff that's happening. And if those conversations get out, that's really scary. So I think we're in a very, very scary situation now where nobody's going to dare to say anything to anybody else. Yeah, that's, yeah, so a new world.
Thank you very much. Is this something that you feel is happening also here, this sort of people involved in observation rather not speaking out because of threats or risks of being exposed in a negative way?
Yeah, it's a really difficult question since, I observed elections in a lot of countries in East Europe, let's say Moldova, Ukraine, and you all the time, of course, that you're open and transparent, but some information are really sensitive, especially related to the source of the information. So it's not up to mission, it's not up to us, in our opinion, because we following international standards and we are following, international rules. So we are not afraid for us, but sometimes you really need to be careful because you can reveal the source, and this can be the issue, not only for this mission, but this can be issue for the next mission and for those people who are sharing information not to be open anymore. So this is, and we are really taking a lot of measures in order to let's say, to deal properly with cybersecurity. It's a challenge for the mission. It's really a challenge. So for me personally, since I'm civil society activist 20-something years, in my country I don't have issues with this. But in order to protect people in the host country, you need to be really, really careful. I just want to address this. Yeah, it's complex.
I would agree that the area where we're more concerned about security of the observers are for the international observers, are for those that are sharing information with us. We don't ourselves feel hesitant to share our findings and be vocal about our findings, but likewise, the civil society that we see across the region are very brave and very active and vocal, and for the most part, they don't hesitate to share their thoughts and findings and what they've seen about the elections, but they are persecuted for it in some cases.
Yeah, maybe just to add on to my two colleagues. I think what's important, and I would like to emphasize that once more, is that election observation methodology is really rapidly developing further, and adapting to the new challenges of the social media campaigning, and there's a way of capturing that in the methodology. But for you as election management bodies, it is also to understand better who is an observer and who has a political mandate or political agenda. Yeah, and here I would like to emphasize once more this declaration of principles for non-partisan election observers, and this provides you with an idea whether an organization is serious about their task of election observation. And in this sense, when you provide accreditation to observers, you might want to check whether this observer organization is a member and has ratified the Declaration of Principles for international or non-partisan election observers and adheres to the Code of Conduct, which provides for impartiality, professionalism, and also neutrality in the sense of non-interference in the electoral process. So, and if that is clear, there's a certain safeguard for you as well. And this also provides you then with the possibility to take on the recommendations and see them more as a partner and an ally, which can promote also recommendations and electoral changes which are close to your heart and your interest. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I know that now we have to release one of our panelists who has to go to Zaventem, so please, big round of applause for all the panelists, for our friends from Romania and Estonia, and for all those who intervene in the debate.
We're now going to move to the final part of our day, and it's always a difficult task to wrap up such a full day where so many discussions have taken place going in many different directions, but I think the depth of the discussion is there, and the difficult task of wrapping up this day now falls onto Ms. Ana Gallego, Director General of DG Justice and Consumers. Good evening to you.
Okay. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. Indeed, it's very difficult to wrap up a session like today's, particularly because I was not lucky enough to be able to follow, but I was debriefed on the sessions of today, and I would like to convey some words to wrap up today. You came to the end of the first day of this very remarkable event that has taken place in the run-up to the elections of the European Parliament. And first of all, I would like to thank everybody, all of you who took part in this event, for what have been really insightful discussions. And you have covered a lot of topics today. And I would only mention a few from your agendas. The unique opportunities and features of the elections to the European Parliament. We are in a particularly important moment for that. And the most urgent challenges to our democracies and elections, and the tools and best practices to address these challenges. Also, the importance of tackling interference by third countries in electoral processes, in democratic systems, a very important topic also to address. The need for transparency, which runs counter to this, and accountable political advertising in electoral campaigns, which is very important to safeguard the electoral process and the transparency of our democracies. Also, the importance of joining forces and of international cooperation to address the electoral threats, as well as the member states' best practices to tackle such threats. And here we've had the opportunity to listen to different experiences from member states and how they tackle the threats they have identified. And also to name the trends and challenges in the electoral observation to ensure that electoral processes are fair and transparent, to ensure the outcome of the democratic process. And at the center of these discussions are the European values that we all share. These are the values on which the European Union has been built, and we need to ensure that it continues to build on. And we have to make sure that these values will be passed on between old and young, from one generation to the other, in their respective situation and in the perspective of the upcoming elections. Tomorrow's discussion will be about a key priority for the 2024 elections to the European Parliament, and this is inclusive participation. No one should be left behind in the European democracy. All Europeans should be able to fully enjoy their EU citizenship and exercise to the full extent their electoral rights if they wish to. And this is not just about fostering equality or preventing discrimination in the exercise of the vote. It is also about a healthy democracy. The 2019 elections had the best turnout since 1994, and we achieved an 8-point increase in turnout compared to the previous ones in 2014. We need to maintain this upward trend and in the turnout, and to that purpose, we must ensure that everyone will be able to participate, regardless their disability, for instance, the geographical location, or any other factor that could affect democratic participation and representation. The past elections in 2019 showed that many ways in which the Parliament has evolved to better reflect the European population as a whole. And the share of women MEPs increased in this sense from 37% to 41%. And the share of MEPs with backgrounds from minority groups almost doubled. One of the pillars of the European Union is the freedom to move across its member states. Freedom of movement, of course, is one of our founding values. European citizens can move freely, everywhere, anywhere within the EU to study and to work since 1993. But when they move to other countries, citizens contribute to the economy of that country, they contribute to the social life, and they enrich the culture of that country. They constitute a powerful demographic in shaping the future of the European Union. But in doing so, when they exercise their right to free movement, they also have to enjoy their right to participate in the electoral process to its full extent, regardless of where they are. And this is of paramount importance to us. By ensuring that all EU mobile citizens can vote, we are sending a strong message that voting has no limit and that all our voices are heard. In this way, we are strengthening the democratic foundations of the Union and reinforcing the idea that Europe truly represents its citizens. It is not just about overcoming geographical barriers. Inclusivity is the very final expression of all democracies and fosters a sense of belonging among all European citizens, irrespective of their background, their gender, their age, or their abilities. Everyone should have the opportunity and the tools to exercise their electoral rights effectively. We must, therefore, also ensure the participation in elections of all groups, including through specific policies and measures that address the need of underrepresented groups. The European Commission and the Director General for Justice and Consumers have been at the forefront of promoting and safeguarding democracy and supporting free, fair and resilient elections. We are working hard to ensure that democratic principles are upheld, that they are protected, and that they are advanced for the benefit of all European citizens. This work is emblematic of the strong commitment of the European Union to democracy and to inclusive, free and fair elections. As part of efforts to protect the 2019 elections, the Commission supported Member States by establishing at that time and organizing meetings of the European Cooperation Network on Elections. The ECNE, ECNE members have contributed significantly to our efforts to ensure free and fair elections, including to tackle cybersecurity threats and to guarantee transparency in all electoral processes. I thank you all for your excellent work. You have done a lot over the years since the creation of the network. You are now working on a compendium on e-voting practices and use of technologies in elections, and actively contributing to the Guide for Good Practices for Voters with Disabilities. The European Cooperation Network on Elections also supports a joint mechanism on election resilience. I thank you all for your strong engagement in this work, and I look forward to continuing our cooperation. Dear participants, the social distancing measures of the COVID-19 pandemic are fortunately long gone. But those measures have a devastating impact on our ability to connect with each other, preventing us from meeting on a more regular basis. So I encourage you to take the opportunity to join the networking cocktail now, where you can continue to exchange ideas and opinions, and we don't need to keep social distancing anymore. So you're very warmly welcome to join the cocktail, and I wish you a very pleasant evening and very fruitful discussions also tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gallego. Indeed, ladies and gentlemen, I'm now standing between you and the drinks after a very long and fruitful day. So it was great to be here and witness all the exchanges. We definitely hope that you'll be in the same kind of spirits tomorrow to continue these fruitful discussions. In the meantime, I'd like to thank everybody, all our speakers, all the participants, definitely all our interpreters. And before we move on to the drink, we would like to organize a family photograph. So all of you, the photographer is going to be at the back there, and he's going to take a photograph of the room. So if you could just stand up and group as much as possible, either turn towards the door and group in the middle with the background, with the stage behind you. So we're all facing the door, and when the lights come up, we're going to see the photographer up there. We only see silhouettes for the moment, but okay, our photographer is going to be a bit of an acrobat. So maybe you should try and move back closer to the stage as much as possible, and maybe come closer to the stage, and then you can spread in the alleys between the seats as well. They come down here. There's still room down here, over there. In the, between the seats there's room, so.